think, in the evening. Is that something that it's beneficial? Would you like the service centers to attend or be present, or is that something that it doesn't hurt my feelings to uninvite me? I was just curious. I don't want to show up and not be invited.
No, I think, Mike, that's a good question. Before we talked about how the service centers would fit in with this project, we had already decided on that event. So at this point, we're just having the Gemini and the Mercury builders, superintendents attending that event.
Okay. And I'm going to Biggie's Pizza.
Hey, that's good. That'll be better than empanadas and some weird rolls, veggie rolls.
Jay played football at Baker with two of my buddies that were Hello? I turned mine on.
I can hear you. I did play football at Baker. I loved it.
Hey.
Who are you talking about?
Graham Wiley was a classmate of mine.
Oh, man. I haven't seen that guy in forever. I thought last time I tracked him down, he was in Germany.
Yeah, well, he actually was in England. He was in England for 3 years.
England, okay, great.
Yeah, I think he works with the Department of Defense somehow, some contracting and engineering. And so.
Yeah, I never wanted to ask him because I always felt like he couldn't tell me.
Yeah.
But he did.
If you have to tell you, yes.
Great guy, one of my favorites. Well, thanks for joining us today.
Absolutely.
And I'm going to go ahead and mute you. You're getting a little feedback, but this is as you all join up. Just please be sure to mute your line, and we'll get started here in a few minutes.
What Jake got?
Lose that. You can still hear them.
They turned something off.
Hey, Tammy, how you doing?
Hey, I'm good. How are you?
Awesome. Hey, I've already started recording just to make sure we get it. So
Perfect. That's awesome.
Good. We've got quite a few people joining in this morning, so good to see everyone.
Yeah. Let me just take a couple of minutes to make sure I have everything lined out and make sure it's all working A-okay. So Jay, can you see my desktop?
There's ours.
We should have a big video on there.
Yeah, you know, Jay, it looks like if you get on first, then you're the host. And even though I came in to start the meeting, I do not have the host controls. Sure what that noise is.
Somebody's phone, I think.
Okay. Yeah, if everyone could make sure that they mute themselves and unmute as needed, that would be fantastic. Jay, can you hear me?
Yes.
It looks like if you log in first, you're the one who has the host controls and I do not. So I just wanted to let you know that I am unable to control the mute of the group.
Okay,
All right.
I can take care of that.
All right. Super. And I have 10:30. So do we want to and smiling and waiting on time?
Sounds good.
Okay,
We ready to roll?
let's do it.
Okay, so good morning, everyone. Welcome to the third installment of the Gemini Zoom meeting series. I hope everybody's having a great Friday and looking forward to a wonderful weekend. I just want to remind everyone, if you are participating today, to please use the chat function and enter your name and your district's name. One of the requirements of being a Gemini school is participating in these Zoom meetings, and that's how we can capture who's attending these meetings. So your name and your school in the chat function, please. And with that, I'll turn it over to Tammy so we can get started.
Great, thank you. So the first thing we wanted to start with today is to just give you an overview of what we're seeing and some of the new things that have been added to the Padlet. And then, you know, we will continue to use the chat feature at any time. If you want to unmute to ask a question, please, you know, do. We don't want to discourage you to speaking. We just ask that if you're not speaking to put yourself on mute so we don't end up with all of those feedback issues and background noise kinds of things. And so, so yeah, so some of the things that are on the Padlet, and Jay, you can see the Padlet, right?
Yes.
Making sure, okay. So some of the highlights from the schools for this week, I wanted to show you what the Mercury schools are working on is they've refined their vision. They're looking at the kinds of things they want to research, and they're building their research teams using, if not all of their staff members, as many of their staff members that are not on the redesign team as possible. And so I want to show you this picture from Meadowlark in Liberal. This is their, I walked in and I was like, wow, that looks like your war wall, right? So what they've got is their vision, and they've got some key areas that they want to build their research teams around. And then because, you know, the redesign team is doing a ton of work in all of these schools. There is a lot of exciting work going on. But really trying to figure out those feedback loops, right? Because the other staff members, not just at Meadowlark, but at other places are like, well, what's going on in there? What are you guys talking about? What are, you know, what are you doing? Are you like making the whole school without us kind of thing, right? And so what Meadowlark did is they have a really good handle as a redesign team of what they're doing and why. And then the teachers on the redesign team are explaining it to their peers. So one day in the last 2 weeks during the PLC time that's regularly scheduled, they had different PLCs rotate in, and the teachers on their redesign team explaining, you know, how they got to this point and what some of this stuff is. And then you can see here the green color are, you know, they wanted feedback from their peers. So it's like, what kinds of things would you want to see included, or what ideas do you have around these different things? And so then the rest of the staff wrote up some of their ideas in green, and they felt like this was really, really successful because their peers thought of things that they didn't think of, and now it's not some big secret mission that's going on behind closed doors. And so, so next steps from this point will be for them to, you know, divide their staff into research teams. And then, you know, with some of these areas like personalized learning, they're looking at some things within a core curriculum. They're looking at STEAM projects and things. So they'll be researching those things in more depth to figure out, okay, where can, what things do we want to put in our comprehensive redesign plan that will move the needle on their vision, and they've, you know, restated that vision into a goal. And so that's really where a lot of the schools are, in varying stages. And so it looks a little different everywhere we go. Teskit, Twin Valley at Teskit, they were ready to share this with their redesign teams that they're forming, and they were talking about, okay, how do we put in some guardrails, right? Because when people start researching big topics like personalized learning or inquiry projects, you know, how do you put in the guardrails so that teams don't get lost in the research? I mean, I don't know about you all, but you know, it's so much fun to look at things on the internet, right? And so you go to one link and it's like, ooh, that's cool. And then you click on a link that's embedded in that, and that looks cool. And then you look at the next thing and it all looks cool. It's really interesting. How do you structure that research in such a way that that they're able to bring back to the redesign team what they found? And so these are just some ideas that they were talking about. They wanted each of their research teams to come back to them with answers to these questions. What is it? And they were talking about that being a deep dive, not a let's get a Google definition of personalized learning, but really digging into it. And just looking at some of these things. For their staff, they really wanted the staff to be open about obstacles. What obstacles do you see in implementing? You know, right away, some people like to just talk about the obstacles. And sometimes they say it like, well, we can't do that because, or we can't do this because. And they wanted people and their teams to approach obstacles, and in parentheses, they have their obstacles are not dead ends, but they are things to plan for. So, you know, that's just maybe some of the next steps is as research teams get going, how do you structure what it is that they're going to be doing in a way that's productive and accountable? And Jay's going to talk a little bit more about some of that. Some really good resources that we have found. Leading Redesign, this iNicole article is phenomenal. I mean, in fact, it probably should be required reading if you're trying to lead this redesign effort. It aligns really, really well with what we're doing with, you know, creating that shared vision and bringing in stakeholders. It's not a lengthy read, but you know, we would certainly like for you to peruse that article. The Summit Learning platform. I have a conference call with Summit Learning on Monday, so maybe I'll have more to share with you the next time we talk. But it says it's got a free personalized learning platform for teachers and schools. And so, you know, I always think, free? I want to know how free that really is. So I'm going to be looking into some of that as well. And then there's some videos, some new resources that we wanted to make sure that you're aware of. Click on as you can or want.
Tammy, could I break in 1 second?
Sure.
If you could go back up to that leading redesign, I just wanted to touch on that, the importance of that article that it posits in that, you know, as schools go through this redesign, I'm noticing that, you know, it's so important to take a shared leadership approach in that there's a lot of delegation. You know, I know I can only speak for the secondary side, but, you know, 5 of the Mercury high schools, all of the principals in those 5 Mercury high schools have been in the principal's chair for no more than 2 or 3 years. So they're all relatively new. And one of the hardest things to do when you're in a position of leadership is to learn how to delegate. And so I think that's a very important thing to keep in the forefront of your mind as you go through this transformative process change in your school to completely redesign. This is not just a remodel, this is a redesign. And to do that, you've really got to empower your staff. So find your teacher leaders, them. The schools that we've been working with that are really moving are the ones that with distributed leadership in the forefront of their minds. So I just want to stress that. Sorry for the bird walk.
Oh, no, not a bird walk at all. I think that, you know, the thing about leaders is there's so many different leadership styles, but in order for this kind of change to really take root, it has to be from a distributed leadership perspective. Absolutely. So you can see that vision statements are being solidified, and they're starting to put some of those things up there. And, you know, keep in mind, you should all have access to this Padlet. And if you've lost access because things happen, let us know and we will resend, because you all can add as well. You know, it's super easy. You just click on there. It's as easy as uploading something to Facebook. So, you know, feel free to share your latest news, your highlights, things that you're learning. You know, this is for all of us. So, and it is private in that, you know, if you Google redesign Padlet, you're not going to come up with this web page, right? Because we've shut off that kind of public access. But you know, feel free to come back here frequently. And then another reminder is that eventually this is going to get so long that it's just going to be messy. So every couple of weeks, I try to go through and pull things off of the resources and put them in this Google site. And the link is there. And so we're dividing these things by topics. And I've added a social emotional learning page. So it's still a work in progress. You know, one of the things that I need to add to this as a statement is kind of a disclaimer. And that is, you know, occasionally we have links to articles and resources that are being provided by a vendor. We're showing those things because there are a lot of free resources, but anything that comes from a particular vendor on this, we're not endorsing the vendor from KSDE. It's not a vendor endorsement. It's we found some free resources you might be interested in. So keep that in mind. You know, we want to be able to be really transparent and share with you all of the really neat things that we're finding. But we're not ready to endorse particular vendors for some of this work. Jay, is there anything you would add to that particular comment?
No, I think that's great. I think that's a nice repository for all the resources that have been pumping through this project, which are coming at lightning speed. So I just posted that question in the chat. And if there's crickets out there in the chat room, we understand, but are there any resources that you have found to be helpful as you begin this road through to redesign? So please list those. Just as Tammy said, feel free to post those under resources on the Padlet. Another thing, and I don't know if, so Lori, thank you. The playbook that was posted on the Google site is a really comprehensive redesign playbook, starting from scratch all the way through to launch. So that's one that we've heard from several people that it's a really good resource.
And that link to the playbook will always stay under resources, as will the 4 disciplines of execution and some of these really core documents, the non-negotiables, the comprehensive redesign plan, and the timeline. Those you will always be able to find quickly and easily here on the Padlet. We won't be removing those at any point. All right.
Tammy, would you want to take them through Epic?
Yeah, I'd love to. So one of the fun things that I got to do on Monday was go to our Epic Elementary School in Liberty, Missouri. And so that was absolutely phenomenal. And I'm going to see if I posted pictures here yet, or I can show them to you in another spot. But, one of the things that Epic Elementary has done is they're in like their 4th year of being redesigned. And so they're seeing some phenomenal results. And so I'm just going to show you some notes that I took, if I can, move all of these things around so that I can see them, right? So Epic Elementary School, Liberty, Missouri, it's kind of a suburb, a bedroom community of Kansas City. 5 years ago, the superintendent that was there wanted to I'm getting distracted here. I can't talk. And they wanted to redesign around project-based learning. And 5 to 6 years ago, that was just something that there just weren't a lot of resources out there. And so what they did was they brought in parents and community members and school district people to figure out, okay, how could we do this? And so, so they did all of this planning, and then what they did was they did remodel a building, right? So they had an old admin building they wanted to remodel, and they remodeled it to meet their needs within this redesign. And so they have one section of each studio. They call it, Studio K is kindergarten, Studio 1 is first grade, kind of what you'd think. But what's unique about it is, for one thing, there are 50 children in each classroom. Yeah, so let that sink in. There are 50 kindergartners in one room. There are 50 first graders in a room, right? Looks like Google's not going to work for me today. So you're thinking, well, how in the world does that work, right? Well, it works really, really well because in the elementary school, in the K2 day, they do their core reading and math in the morning, and then in the afternoon they have specials and projects. And so their core reading and math is very personalized. So you've got 50 kids in a room, and you've got 2 licensed, fully qualified teachers. And they're, so the teachers they never do whole group instruction. They only do small groups. So the teachers are pulling small groups and doing instruction, while the rest of them are on personalized learning programs using, iPads. And so they're doing interventions that happen kind of organically because they can look at the data daily. And so they don't have to wait for progress monitoring data every 2 to 3 weeks. They look at the data, they're adjusting as they go, and they're meeting the needs of all of the kids. So that was really interesting. And then they do this project-based learning in the afternoon where they integrate English language arts, science, social studies, and social emotional learning in authentic ways. So, they might not have standards for all 4 of those in one particular project, but they integrate those standards throughout the projects. Kindergartners, their projects might last a week, maybe 2. What they're doing with kindergarten is they're building the behaviors to help them learn how to engage in deep thinking and projects. And then as the kids get older, those projects become increasingly more in-depth, more complex, so that by 5th grade, the focus of their projects is how are we going to take what we learned to change the world or impact the global community. So I will post pictures of the Epic visit with some notes when we're done here, so that you can come back and look at that. It was really a phenomenal. I have never seen anything like it. I've done thousands of classroom walkthroughs in my career. I've never seen anything so engaging and so interesting. To have 50 first graders in a room the beginning of October and have it be, the management was phenomenal. The kids were engaged. The teachers were working with small groups. Kids were working in partners. They were working, with 3 or 4 small groups, or they were working independently. And then the I got to see the project time for the bigger kids. And it was so interesting because, you know, their spaces include a maker space, you know, so think of, you know, everything that's completely scrubbable, because they know that those projects are going to be super messy. And so the Studio 5, right outside their door, they have a vegetable garden. So they're learning gardening, they're learning a bit of chemistry, a bit of biology, they're selling their produce. So they're, you know, learning some business things. One of the projects 2 little boys were working on was they were trying to build a drone. And so they could just go right outside during the project time, prop the door open, and they're experimenting with their drone. They're trying to figure out why it's not working quite right. You know, just the thinking and the collaboration that was taking place during those projects. And the projects were all different. You know, some were doing something with vinegar and mixing solutions, you know, to the gardening, to the drones, to the electronics. Really, really interesting. And you know what I love about what Epic shared was they've got the academic data to back it up. You know, into their 4th year, their kids are sailing on state assessments, on MAP tests, and the way, you know, and their students are diverse. They're socioeconomically. Their town itself, Liberty, Missouri, is not very culturally diverse, but they do have every end of the spectrum for social economic expanse. And so you know, it's not like a special school where they're just selecting the gifted kids, right? It's regular kids learning in a completely different way.
So Tammy, there's quite a few questions in the chat room for you.
Ooh.
Epic. I tried to answer one. If I answered incorrectly, shame on me. You can virtually slap me. But there are some questions there for you. I'd like to talk about Liberal High School's visit to Wisconsin this week, if I could. As far as secondary redesign, Liberal High School found a schedule that they were interested in. It's called the Flex Mod schedule. So I know it's on the Padlet there under What Are You Learning? But Liberal High School went to Green Bay, Wisconsin this week and visited a couple, I think 3 different high schools that have the same enrollment as Liberal High School. And all 3 of these schools were using some form of what they call a Flex Mod schedule. And you can YouTube it. They've got quite a few videos out there about the Flex Mod. You can call Liberal High School for Kapelman. She can give you a great summary. And I'm going to do my best to capture some of that feedback they brought back on the Flex Mod schedule and post it on the Padlet. But basically, it's the day in a Flex Mod schedule is broken up into either 15, 20, or 30-minute segments of time. And then, so each day is like that. So if you can imagine, some classes go for 3 segments, some go for 1, some go for 5. So, you know, and I know that the master schedulers out there probably have already had a heart attack, but it's a schedule that a couple of those schools have just gone to, and then one of the schools that Liberal visited is the godfather of the Flex Mod, and they've had it in since 1970. So it's a mix of large group classes, and their large group classes involve 3 teachers. 1 teacher to instruct, 1 teacher to video, so they could post it later so the kids that weren't able to be there could watch the video, and then 1 to move about the room and help students where they needed it. So they had a large group schedule, a large group instructional model, then a small group, which would be your typical classroom, your labs, those kinds of things. And then they had resource centers all throughout the school. And one thing is that they made the point, you know, the school that started this in 1970, they built their school for a Flex Mod. So they had large, you know, stadium seating kind of classes that you see the picture there in the Padlet. The other schools that just implemented looked a lot like our typical high schools in Kansas. They just retrofitted their building for the schedule. So what you see there is that large group. And so there's 3 teachers in that situation. Teachers really decide on each day how long to meet. They may take 3 segments. They may take 1. One segment or mod might be 20 minutes. And then they can decide at the end of that 20 minutes, you know what, we're struggling with this, so we're going to break out into small groups tomorrow and do 40 minutes of time in small groups on this. So, I think the teachers, one of the big takeaways I heard, and this is all secondhand, so hopefully I'm getting this right, but the teachers in those buildings in the FlexMod schedule were able to really build their own schedule because of the flexibility and how many segments of time there were throughout the day. The students also were able to build their schedule. And it was, as students matured and they were more directed in their learning, they were given more ownership in their schedule. One instance of that is a senior at one of the high schools that, was there for a 0-hour module, maybe a 20 or 30 minutes to finish up a class or to participate. And then the rest of their day, they were out working. Their schedule included out working, and they were given credit for the job that they were involved in. And then at the end of the day, they came back to school. But the key about that was the student built that schedule. And the schedule was flexible enough to where it would allow for personalization like that. And Liberal made the connection between an individual plan of study and a FlexMod schedule. The other strength of this is that there were no bells. There was a bell at the beginning of the day, there was a bell at the end of the day, but in between, there were no bells. So the question was, well, how do students know when to move? And the answer was they look at their cell phone, they find out what time it is, and they move to their next class according to their schedule. So the passing period, they didn't have one large passing period in between periods. It was a constant ebb and flow of the day. We're talking about a schedule here. So that's not the only aspect of redesign, but this was something that Liberal felt like could be transformational in their school. And not just to change the schedule, but to change the schedule in a way to allow them to really leverage the goals and the vision that they have for redesign at Liberal High School. So it's certainly the only schedule out there. The more we get into this, the more we think that changing the schedule is a necessity to redesign, but that may not be true. But this is just an example of a different way to go about that, addressing something that seems to be one of the bigger obstacles that we're finding as we talk about redesign, and that's the schedule. I'm just going to go ahead and end with that. And if there are any chat questions, I can work through those.
Jay, there was one chat question. It says, are there any examples of this FlexMod at the middle school level, 6th to 8th graders, and the needed structure at this age group? Just asking.
I don't know of any. Those schools that Liberal visited were all high schools, and they may have had multiple feeder middle schools. So I'm not sure about that, but that's a good point that, I think that basically they set that system up to, as students matured and they were able to own more of their learning, they've earned more choice in their schedule. It was kind of a graduated thing. For freshmen in those buildings, it may have looked, their schedule may have been a little bit more prescribed than juniors and seniors. But I'm just estimating that. So, but yeah, certainly according to the student's maturity level and those kinds of things. But one of the things that I liked that Liberal found was that when they talked to the administrators in those buildings, they felt like they were really teaching students to make decisions that we expect them to make good decisions after they leave us, but sometimes we don't allow them to make those kinds of decisions when they're with us. And so they felt like with the ownership in that schedule, students virtually each student had a schedule, an individualized schedule for each day. And so they felt like that taught a lot of self-regulation, time management, self-advocacy, because some of these classes overlapped. So you might have a band student who needed to talk to the band director and say, listen, I've got this class overlaps with another module that I've got for 5 minutes. Could I please, could we, collaborate on a different idea here? Maybe I could be out of your class a few minutes earlier. It caused some really good conversations, and it kind of moved the ownership of their learning plan over onto the students a little bit more.
Jay, there's another question. It says, I love this idea. With the different schedules, any concerns with school safety, hallway supervision, etc.?
Great question, Wayne. That came up. One of the things that came, well, first of all, with the hallway supervision, with that constant ebb and flow, they found that the tardies went down. They kind of redefined what a tardy was, though, in that, I think they had 5 minutes between the segments of time. But again, a third of the school may be moving while the other third is in class. So it was really ebb and flow. They felt like the hallways were a lot more quiet, a lot more of a learning environment. Sometimes when you have the entire school out amongst the hallways in a 5-minute period, it can be a little bit more crazy as opposed to just, a third moving at a time. So, and I'm just guesstimating on those breakdowns. But one of the other concern was when parents called in and said, hey, I need Johnny because we've got a dental appointment. Sometimes the office had trouble finding where Johnny was because they have, Johnny's got his own schedule, and it's kind of a flexible schedule. So, text messaging. I mean, I think those schools in Wisconsin got around to the point where, maybe the student would text with the parent and then be an advocate for themselves and go to the office and say, I've got an appointment. So I think it was interesting. That's just a tip of the iceberg, I'm sure, with regards to your question, Wayne.
All right. So Jay, do you want to go on and talk about the infographic that you've uploaded here
Sure.
today?
So
Okay.
if you could pull this up, and I'm going to share this with everyone on this call. This is just a visual of what we've been asking the Mercury schools to work through, starting with their vision, moving into goals of that vision that support that vision, and then the metrics used to measure, lag measures, and then lead measures. And lag measures are, your outcome, maybe like a summative assessment, something that happens at the end of learning or the end of the work. A lead measure is something that is the work, that you use lead measures to leverage your lag measures. So I'm going to focus in on the green question bubbles there on the left. These are the questions that the Mercury schools have been wrestling with. And right now, most of our schools are at that metrics point. They're talking about, they've set their goals, they've set their vision, and they're talking about what metrics are we going to use that we feel are authentic for those goal areas. So starting with the vision, what should students know and be able to do when they move on from our school? And the vision statement needs to be bold, it's concise, easy to recall, it's branded in some way. A lot of our Mercury schools are using their mascots, which is really cool, and it's measurable. Then as they take their vision, and that was hard work. It's hard to think at that higher level because a lot of times educators want to jump right into the what. I'm just as guilty as the next. But as they took their vision and turned them into goals, what are the categories of the skills that you've identified in the vision? What are the categories of the skills that you as a school district want to foster and develop in your students? So these are just example goals. social emotional skills, academic skills, technical employability skills. Our schools are selecting goal areas. I think I can say with fidelity that every one of them has chosen social emotional as a goal area. And then when you get to from your goal areas, you talk about the metrics used to measure. And again, those are just examples. Setting a lag measure from X to Y by when. And some of those questions, and it's too small for me to read, but it's basically what's your current status of students in social emotional health, in academics, in technical employability skills. And then the why is what's your desired state and by when. And those are your lag measures to focus on. And then you get into the fun part where you start talking about what are the levers, the actions that we can add into our system to really leverage kids in our school towards those lag measures. And so those are, again, just some examples for social emotional and advisory based system, heavy emphasis on mentoring and relationships. And then academic skills, project-based learning environments, with technical and employability skills, increasing work-based learning opportunities. Those are easy to grasp at. Obviously, the ones that our schools are looking into, they get much more down into the weeds, which is great. But at this point, again, our Mercury schools are really looking at metrics. They're coming up with some redesign goal teams. So they've had a redesign team in place, and now they're getting into some goal teams, research teams on each goal. So it's starting to it's spread throughout the buildings now, which is a good place to be. So I hope that helps pitch it, but I'm going to share that with all of you as a Google drawing, and you can use it, pitch in any way that you see fit.
Jay, there was a question on the chat. Have flex schools built-in creativity goals, possibly a time to support fine arts or culinary, etc.?
If that's about the flex mod schools, I'm guessing that's the question.
I think so.
Yeah, possibly a time to support fine arts culinary. They still have band. They still have your art classes. In fact, I think they were able to add course offerings through that flexible schedule. So they could actually get into some even more refined areas of music and art. In CTE, I think that there were some, band typically can be one of those monsters to move in the master schedule. And so we asked that. I asked Liberal of that, and they said in those flex mod schools, they had band maybe for the entire band to be together twice a week. But the rest of the time, the band room was open, and kids could, your flute section could come in and just spend time. Or you could have private lessons. I think they said in one of the schools, the band director was a concert pianist. So they actually provided, that instructor provided private piano lessons to students who weren't even in band. So, that's kind of down to the person, but there was definitely a lot of thinking behind the arts and CTE and how that can happen through the flex mod.
Okay, so here's a phenomenal question. Wouldn't the R's we have to choose for our KISA model fit right in here? This is such a fantastic question because you all are on the cutting edge, right? So we've been talking about a lot, and I think we mentioned it last time, that redesign and KISA are not two separate siloed things. We talked about it a little bit. What we're doing with redesign is going to be the model for KISA, right? So yeah, I mean, if you've got your needs assessment that you did before you ever decided to redesign anything, and you feel like those R's still fit and that's what you want to redesign around, absolutely. Your R's could be would fit probably pretty nicely. Jay, you can jump in here where these battle wigs are, right? Or you could drill it down a little bit more. But yeah, don't do two separate things. You know, especially if you're a smaller district and you're redesigning, you know, see it should be one thing. We're still working out some of the hiccups with that, you know, because like a big district that has, you know, 13 elementary schools, but they're redesigning one, you know, KSDE is a district-wide accreditation process, but, you know, that whatever they're doing, they shouldn't be doing a redesign and a KSDE thing. What would you like to add to that, Jay?
No, I think that captures it. We've had some discussions already with some Mercury schools that have asked that very question, and we don't want this to be on parallel tracks. All the work that you're doing as part of the redesign can be the documentation for accreditation. Brad, our deputy commissioner, would tell you that basically the redesign is really the accreditation on steroids. And so it's moving at a much faster pace. So they are one and the same, and we just need to continue to promote that message.
You know, the other important point too is that KSDE is built around existing systems, right? So it aligns with existing systems, but when you're changing or redesigning a system, eventually KSDE is going to look different for that, right? Because KSDE was built for the same systems that we've had for 20 years. So yeah. So when you have questions about that, you know, shoot those at us. We may not always have the right the immediate answer, but you know, those are things we've got to take to the deputy commissioner and the commissioner on a regular basis and say, this is what districts and schools are asking. You know, how do we work through that? So, all right, it's time for you guys to have a chat. Have your schools gotten to the point where you're starting to talk about those goal areas or, you know, things that you're wanting to research? And if so, what are some of them? If you would just pop in a comment into the chat and we'll look at those here. We'll give you probably 2 minutes to do that. So yeah, let's see what you're thinking there.
Tracy, I have that same problem.
Someone's asking about a waiver. There is no waiver. I'm not sure what a waiver is required. If you're talking about a waiver from KSDE, you don't need one. So if that's an issue, if you want to talk about it further when we're doing more Q&A towards the end here, we can talk through more of that.
Oh, from seat time or state assessments. Now, state assessments are, you know, that's not, unless we go down the road like we did a couple of years ago, where we had some schools apply for a waiver. but that's not what we're, anything that we're looking at as far as a waiver from state assessments. That's the federal accountability that we have in place. Now, seat time, there is no need for a waiver from seat time because since 2005, schools have the potential or have the ability to award credit to students not based on seat time. It can be based on the student actually mastering the standards. That's one of the things that has come out through our discussions with multiple schools is that if we're talking about a personalized learning model, doesn't that mean that students can accelerate, according to where they are in learning things? And so that seat time requirement is not there. You can award credit at any time when the certified teacher feels like that student has met has mastered the standards at a level to award credit.
All right. So yeah, I'm seeing a lot of really great ideas about, looking at calendar and scheduling, social emotional, individualized learning, personalized instruction, heading towards project-based learning and building relationships. Super. This is really exciting, you guys. This is going to change the way school looks. 4-day week with 1 flex day, job shadowing. How many buildings in the state utilize the competency-based credit option instead of the 1116 rule? Good question. We'll have to research that one. Maybe Jay knows.
Well, no, I don't know. I'm sure there's more than what I've heard, but Josh, we had this discussion with Liberal yesterday because they tried to go to a competency-based grading system a couple years ago, and it didn't fly. I think mainly because everybody goes through education and has letter grades and those kinds of things, and I think it just was too much of an innovative idea at that time. I do know that Chapman High School uses competency-based grading. So in essence, what that is students, as they master the standards, they're awarded credit as they master the standards at that point in time. So real-time learning and real-time awarding of credit. But that's the only one that I know of. Chapman High School is using something like that. So if there are others out there, please reveal yourselves. But that's one of the models. Competency-based education is basically when students can show mastery of certain skills that they're awarded the credit at that time, and they can accelerate through our system. Great question, Josh. And I have no idea what Rule 1116 is. So.
Okay, so the next area that we wanted to chat about is communication, because like I said earlier, redesign teams have a ton of work to do, right? They have been super busy to this point, and depending on the size of your school, sometimes it might feel like that work is happening in a silo. And the other staff are like, what's going on? What are you doing? Why is your door closed? And, one of the things we're finding is that sometimes the redesign teams feel like they want to have this is really messy work. And so before they go and talk to their peers about it, it's like they want it to be perfect before they share. But if it was perfect before they share, then the other staff aren't going to feel connected, like they had any input. And so what are you guys finding as this work goes on? Are you finding ways to, what do your feedback loops look like? How are you engaging additional staff members, families, community in the conversations that have taken place so far. If you want to, use your, unmute and talk or put that in the chat, what are you finding about communicating the work to date?
So they're tearing up the chat, Tammy.
Yeah, I know. I was thinking maybe I had an electronic malfunction. Oh, here we go. Invited community, business, board members during a PD day to start the process of creating the vision. Good. Well, while people are thinking about that, I'm going to scroll up to a couple of other questions from the previous conversation. One was, but would you say that state funding is still based off of, it just disappeared, based off of FTE? There are many hoops to jump through if a student is working on an internship, going to concurrent enrollment. How would you coach us on those things?
Take a look at that. Okay, really good question. One of the things that and this came up a lot when I was wearing my CTE hat, in that a lot of really good application learning can happen on the job site in say a career and technical education area. And so one of the things that schools would have to jump through, and I know somebody else asked this question too about insurance and those kinds of things. We could spend a whole nother session on just that. But as long as students are enrolled on the daily schedule, if they're out working or if they're at a community college or one of the four-year universities taking a concurrent class, as long as they're still enrolled, and they're on, they're in your student information system, they count. And for years, I know that students that, for instance, when I was at Shawnee Heights, we had students that spent a half day with us at the high school and a half day with Washburn Tech. Well, those students were still, we awarded credit to them for that afternoon at Washburn Tech. And those students were still funded at 1.0 FTE. So our system is not set up to punish those that have students that are off-site learning. So it's just to the degree that you make sure that they are learning and that you have good programs off-site. As long as they're still enrolled, they're still a 1.0 FTE. Great question, Melissa.
Some of the communication ideas, we are simply using email and a newsletter communication right now. We are working on other plans such as monthly coffee group discussions, district and building site councils, business discussion panels, community open house forums, discussion with their board, sharing with PTOs. One question is, what conversations have taken place between the Board of Regents and KSDE regarding their support of redesign?
Great question. We have the Board of Regents represented on our policy advisory group for this project. So if there are things that come up, like some of the things that we've talked about a little bit today, like credits and transcripts, we are in communication with the Kansas Board of Regents. And so, and on a higher level, our vision for education K-12, we're working very hard with the Board of Regents to align our visions. They have a vision of, a 60% graduation rate at K-Board. So we're trying to meet those together. They're all our kids. And so, but we do have Board of Regents representation on in fact, it's Blake Flanders, the CEO, is on our policy advisory group. So we are keeping them in the loop. And when things come up, we feel like it's a great partnership that we can take those right to the Board of Regents and share those obstacles if they come up.
All right. Well, thank you for chiming in on the ways that you're keeping everyone in the loop in your local communities and you know, Rotary clubs, community groups, PTOs. Being really forward thinking and communicating this will pay off dividends when it's time to actually implement and things get kind of messy. So thank you for that. All right, so to kind of close out our 1 hour session, remember, you know, towards the, you know, from 11:30 to however long you want to stay on, we can answer individual questions that maybe the whole group wouldn't necessarily be in need of hearing. But to kind of close this section out, we really want to make these Zoom meetings better each time. And so if you could either in the Zoom group chat or a private chat, if you could just tell us, you know, what are you finding that's helpful from these Zoom meetings and what would you like to see more of? We'll give you 2 or 3 minutes to kind of think about that and add that to the chat. The thing about the Zoom and the chat is once we close this out, you can't go back and add feedback to the chat, if that makes sense. So if you want time to think about it and have feedback, you can email Jay and I. So, but you know, this is an interesting format. Zoom is phenomenal, but really trying to meet your needs when we've got, I don't know how many people we've got on here right now, 42 participants. We really would like your feedback. So as you're giving that feedback, Jay, what other things would you like to say to them before we move into our more specific coaching time?
Sure, and just if that feedback, you don't want to share that with the entire group, if you just want to message either Tammy or I privately, that's great. But we are very interested in your feedback on these meetings. Please be critical. We want to serve your needs. So please offer advice, different things you'd like to see. We'd love. Just a reminder, next Thursday, October 12th, from 4:30 to 6:30 in the evening, we're having a Mercury Gemini mixer. So the Mercury schools and the Gemini schools are invited to be part of a reception from 4:30 to 6:30. Thursday, October 12th, in the Riverview Room at the Hyatt in Wichita. That's the end of the first day of the KSDE conference. So if you're already coming to the conference, please stop into that reception. We'd love to see you there. If you're not attending the conference and you still want to come to the reception, feel free. So 4:30 to 6:30 in the Riverview Room, Thursday, October 12th at the Hyatt in Wichita. And
one thing I would add to that is that, first of all, it's being sponsored by 3 phenomenal sponsors, USA, KNEA, and KASB. So we have food. So that's super fun to have food available. And if you haven't RSVP'd, in order to make sure we have enough food, if you're coming and you're going to eat, would you please email our assistant, Teresa, at Teresa Cody at ksde.org. That way we can make sure we have enough of those little spring rolls that everybody likes so well.
And the last thing, just as a reminder, is there is another event, I guess you'd call it, the Kansans Can Symposium. I know that our service centers who are on with us today are working hard on this. It's the Kansas Can Symposium. It's March 5th and 6th. It's going to be in Manhattan. And I think it's a day and a half. I think the March 5th and 6th is a Monday, Tuesday. And it's a day and a half, full day on Monday, half day on Tuesday. And there will be a Mercury strand. So there'll be breakout there. I think there's 7 breakout sessions throughout that day and a half. And there will be, we are having our Mercury schools present during those breakout sessions. So if you're wanting to learn more, wanting to more ideas, what's going on out there, or be able to share ideas, that would be a great event to be part of. It's the Kansas Can Symposium, March 5th and 6th in Manhattan. And our service centers are organizing that, so I'm sure they'll be getting information out to everyone. Okay. Well, I think that concludes our third Zoom meeting with the Geminis. Thanks everybody for your attention and time. If you want to stay on and chat a little bit more, feel free. But we'll officially end this with a happy Friday and have a great weekend. Okay, so anybody that's staying on, if you want to unmute and ask questions, if you want to continue to use the chat, feel free.
You know, one thing I might have said earlier too was, you know, in between these webinars or these Zoom meetings, as questions arrive, post them to the Padlet, because Jay and I watch that daily, and you might, you know, our other schools, Mercury and Gemini schools, might have that answer for you. So that way you don't have to wait around for this. So feel free to use that Padlet. Chris, are you still on? I kind of see your blank screen. Yeah. So I noticed a question you had said, or a comment you had said earlier, was that Epic, about Epic's enrollment, how they get kids. And what they were telling me on Monday was when they started, because they're not a neighborhood school, right? So when they started, they did a random lottery from all of their other elementary schools, and that's what they started with. And now, in order to fill their classes, they try to keep siblings, right, together. So they have those, you know, the ones that started in like kindergarten are now fourth graders. So they've tried to keep them the whole time. So that's not a lottery each time, you know, so that kids aren't bouncing in and out. And then to fill their additional spots, if they have additional spots, they do go back and do that random lottery. So they've got students with disabilities. They've got students from, you know, all walks of life.
Correct. My answer was not a good answer. Application. I mean, they have to put their name in the hat, is what I was.
Oh, I thought you meant that they had to apply and then they were selected based off of.
No.
Oh, okay.
Because
Okay.
if they don't want to go, they don't have to attend. I mean, they can stay with their neighborhood school. So I just meant they had to put their name in the hat. The term application was not a great answer on my part.
Oh, okay. I just wanted to be clear that, you know, they're not cherry picking the gifted kids in their district to go there necessarily.
And like I said, we're excited. We're heading there. I got 30 teachers that are heading there in 2 weeks, and so.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah, it's going to be fun. And so, and Lewis and Clark, if you didn't get a chance to visit that school either, they're doing a lot of great things too. They got a little bit of project-based mixed in with a lot of team teaching that they do in that school as well. And so we're going to visit both of those schools while we're there. So
Yeah, that'll be excellent.
it'll be fun. So, all right. Well, thank you guys.
Thanks, Chris.
Yeah. All right. So the rest of you are just hanging out to see what other people are going to say, huh? All right, well, we'll stay on here a bit, but Jay and I have some cleanup to do. So, Jay, were you able to capture the Zoom chat so that we can go through those questions in case we missed some?
Yes, I'm doing that right now.
Fantastic.
Yeah, we can go back and look through it and find those that maybe we didn't have a chance to really address. Make sure.
Great. And yay, we got the recording this time, right?
Yeah, we're still recording, so.
Super, yeah. Nick can edit that to his heart's content.
I The good news is the chat is 6 pages.
That is so awesome. That's going to be some really great feedback.
Yes. Very good. Very good.
I didn't see where anyone gave us any feedback on how to make these better. So it must mean it's already awesome, right?
There's always room for improvement.
Yeah, there is. I
But,
agree.
You know, just private messaging us too and come through that. Okay, so I've got the chat all copied, and I've got the recording. I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording.